Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us today. I'm so thrilled to see so many of you have made it to our webinar. My name is Laura Robyn, and I'm here today to represent the Human Evolution Research Institute at UCT. I'm joined with an incredible panel of experts who are going to speak to you today about the very special anniversary that we're celebrating or commemorating. Before I hand over to Lauren Schroeder, who will be our moderator for the panel, I just want to run through Crowdcast. It might be unfamiliar to some of you, and there's a few housekeeping rules. On the right-hand side, you'll see a column with little icons. That top one is the chat. You'll see that there are a few people who've already said hello. I'm also going to say hello. Feel free to use the chat as we go along. And I know that we'll be covering a lot of ground today. The webinar goes from 3 to 4:30 South African time. And we welcome questions, but we're going to ask that if you could share the questions in the question box. So just below chat, you'll see a question mark. If you click on that, you can submit your questions here. I'll put one in there. To remind you. And then at the end, when Lauren opens the floor for questions as we go along, we'll address these. I think that's about all. Crowdcast is wonderful in that we don't have to worry about muting ourselves and keeping our video off. So please sit back, relax, and enjoy the program. Lauren, I'm going to hand it to you.
Thank you, Laura. Just gonna show. Here we go. Awesome. So hi, everyone. I'm so happy that you could make it today. So also good afternoon, good morning, good evening to those all over the world. I would like to welcome you all to a very special webinar commemorating the centenary of the Taung Child, as well as the announcement of the species Australopithecus africanus, and 100 years of palaeoanthropology research in South Africa. So my name is Lauren Schroeder. I am an associate professor of palaeoanthropology at the University of Toronto, as well as a research associate of the Human Evolution Research Institute at the University of Cape Town, so HERI for short. And I'll be moderating today. So the event is a collaboration between many institutions, museums, and universities. And I would like to send a huge thank you to the paleoanthropology community in South Africa. And I'd also like to send a special thanks to Laura from HERI, Laura Robyn, who is an organizing magician and has helped so much with all of this organization, advertising, etc. So thank you from the bottom of our hearts. So just to set the scene before we start our discussion, as most of you know, the Taung Child is one of the most significant hominin fossils ever discovered, and it has contributed immensely to our understanding of human evolution. So it was found in 1924 in a limestone quarry near the town of Taung, South Africa, and it earned its nickname from its place of discovery. The fossil, which is a skull belonging to an Australopithecus africanus child, is estimated to be between 2.6 and 2.8 million years old. And it was first described by Australian anatomist Raymond Dart from the University of the Witwatersrand. And his findings were published in Nature on the 7th of February, 1925. At the time, the prevailing belief was that human ancestors originated in Eurasia, but the Taung Child provided the first definitive fossil evidence that early hominins evolved in Africa. Despite strong resistance to this idea at the time, the discovery challenged long-held assumptions. In the 1920s, scientists also believed that large brains were the defining trait of human evolution. However, the Taung Child, with its small chimpanzee-sized brain, human-like teeth, and evidence of upright walking, suggested a different narrative. And that narrative is that bipedalism preceded the development of large brains in our evolutionary history. Ultimately, the Taung Child helped establish Africa as the cradle of humankind and paved the way for 100 years of paleoanthropological research and fieldwork on the continent. So today, 100 years after DART's publication, I am so excited to announce the publication of an open access special issue in the South African Journal of Science. So, in this issue of 12 articles, as well as an introduction from the guest editors, so that is Robyn Pickering, Jonathan Sally, Becky Ackerman, and myself, we reflect on the science that the Taung Child inspired, but also society and the impact of the political and colonial landscape during the development of paleoanthropology. The hope is that shedding light on the history of the field will help us do better in the future for both our science, but also for the communities in which we work. And so for this special issue, we were very dedicated to involve the community from Taung. And so we commissioned the cover art from the Kanu Creative Arts Agency in Taung. The artist, Machadisu Laburu, provides a very touching description of this piece, which the Iziko Museums of South Africa is in the process of acquiring, hopefully. We have also provided Setswana translations of all the special issue abstracts, as well as the leader article. So it's live right now, so you can go ahead and download it when the webinar is done. But this is not where the commemoration ends. So we have a number of upcoming events that you should look out for. We have a podcast series that will explore themes covered in the SAJS special issue. We also have educational resources, including posters for schools, which will be made freely available on HERI's website. In addition, we are planning a Heritage Month celebration. So this is just to say, watch this space. Okay. So I'm going to move on to our event for today, and I just want to go through a little bit of the program so everyone knows what's up. So the program will start with an introduction from our panelists. We will then engage in a moderated discussion centered on 4 themes for reflection. So we'll focus on the history, we'll focus on the science, the community, and then a look to the future. We will also leave time at the end for some audience Q&A. So as Laura said, if you're watching live, feel free to post your questions at any time throughout this event in the Q&A section on the right-hand side. And also, if your question is directed to a specific panelist, please mention that. Okay. So now we're back. So we have 5 esteemed guests with us today who will be sharing their expertise and knowledge as we reflect on the centenary. So we have Robyn Humphreys, Georgina Luti, Mirriam Tawane, Bernard Zipval, and Krista Kuljian. And I will turn it to them to introduce themselves and provide a short statement about either their connection to palaeosciences in South Africa and or to the Taung Child in general. And I'll go in alphabetical order of surnames. So I'll start with Robyn.
Hi everyone, I'm Robyn Humphreys. I'm from the University of the Western Cape in the Historical Studies Department. And I think just looking at that picture encapsulates like what like I'm interested in how people connect with archaeological sites outside of thinking of them as scientific sites, right? And I'm interested in human remains, so not necessarily fossils, but I think the picture illustrates that these fossils and these sites have meanings to communities outside of what they tell us about human evolution or about the past, and how do we engage with that? Yeah, and so that's what I think about when I think about Taung. Yeah.
Thanks, Robyn. Krista.
Thanks so much. It's an honor to be here. And I am a historian of science and a science writer based at Weiser at Wits University in Johannesburg. And I'm the author of 3 books, one of which is called Darwin's Hunch, Science, Race, and the Search for Human Origins. And I spent quite a lot of time with the Raymond Dart papers at WITS. And so one of the chapters is on Dart and the Taung skull. And then I write about Dart's later career as well, and his successor, Philip Tobias, and then some of the current fossil finds. One chapter is also about a trip that Mirriam Tawane helped me to make. Thank you, Mirriam. And you'll see that the Taung skull is on the cover of the book, and that's thanks to Bernard Zipfel, who is the professional photographer. So thanks, Bernard. And that's my connection to the Taung skull.
Thanks, Krista. Georgina.
Thank you, Lauren. So my name is Georgina Luti, and I'm a geologist. I'm a PhD student in the Department of Geological Sciences at the University of Cape Town, and I'm affiliated to the Human Evolutionary Research Institute. So I previously worked in the paleontology section at the National Museums of Kenya, and that's where I developed my interest in human evolution. And it's one of the main reasons I decided to pursue a PhD in this field. So my connection to the palaeoanthropology in South Africa is that I'm currently working on dating caves in the cradle of humankind. So the cradle is the richest fossil record in the world, and it hosts early pre-human relatives. So we refer to these as hominins. And one of my PhD aims is to carry out a comparative study between the hominin found here in South Africa, known as Paranthropus robustus, and the one found in Eastern Africa, known as Paranthropus boise. Yes, thank you.
Thanks, Georgina. Mirriam.
Afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Lauren, and thank you for the team for organizing this. My name is Mirriam Tawane. I am sitting here as one of the Taung local. I grew up 30 kilometers from the village of Buxton, where the site was discovered in a village called Apamajakoro. The Greater Taung local municipality constitutes about 106 villages. We are a rural site. So that is my connection to the site. I grew up hearing a lot of stories about the skull of a boy that was taken away from the village by the white men. So that also created that little bit of interest when I went to the university to study more. But right now, I have acquired a qualification in palaeoanthropology, studied at the Wits University. So that is my connection to the skull. I am now the one that is alive from Taung. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mirriam. And then finally, Bernard.
Thank you so much, Lauren. Thank you for the invite to this interesting forum. I am currently the University Curator of Fossil and Rock Collections at the University of the Witwatersrand. So anything that's a fossil or a rock, I curate. And that includes the hominins, which is probably the smallest collection we have here. We have lots of other things, dinosaurs, therapsids, etc. So this is one of the collections. And my connection to the Taung Child is that I have the privilege of actually looking after it on a daily basis as part of my job. But my background is pediatric medicine. I come from health sciences. And through that, I got into paleoanthropology, doing research on the origins of bipedalism. So that's how I ended up here via a long roundabout route. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Bernard. So yeah, again, thank you all so much for being here. I'm very excited to have this discussion with you. So as I said, this discussion is going to be split into 4 themes. So the first theme is a discussion that kind of starts in the past. So we'll look at the history. And we know that the history of the development of paleoanthropology was, filled with exciting finds, lots of scientific leaps during the past 100 years. But the societal backdrop of these discoveries was, as some of you already mentioned, was deeply colonialist. So I want to direct the first question to Krista, who has already said that she's written a book that dives into this question in great detail. So, Krista, reflecting on the political and colonial context of the 1920s, can you comment on how this may have shaped the reception and significance of the Taung Child?
Thanks, Lauren. Well, I think just to start with the context that in 1871, Charles Darwin wrote The Descent of Man. And in that book, he had a theory or a hunch that all humans had evolved in Africa. And that idea was not widely accepted by his peers, his scientific peers. And it was and most scientists at the time, as you said earlier, believed that humans had evolved in Europe or perhaps Asia. And they were really influenced by the false assumption that Europeans were superior and that other peoples of the world were inferior. And so that false assumption shaped some of the thinking at the time. Raymond Dart, who was originally from Australia, studied in the UK and then arrived in South Africa in 1922. And his thinking was shaped by that colonial thinking and that view of white supremacy that was held at the time. Also, another aspect of the historical context is that Neanderthal fossils were found in Germany and Belgium and France. And so some people were looking in Asia, but no one was looking in Africa. And in 1912, there was a fossil find that was announced in England, Piltdown Man. And as you described, Lauren, the thinking was at the time that a larger brain case was one of the first steps in human evolution. And so Piltdown Man, those fossils had a large brain case. And so it was 40 years later that Piltdown Man was shown to be a hoax. It wasn't an ancient fossil at all. And it had been planted there, but it had a major impact on the thinking of some of Raymond Dart's mentors, especially. So by the time Raymond Dart wrote about the Taung skull in 1925, the reaction from his mentors, scientists in Europe and the UK, was very skeptical. And so Dart, when he described the Taung skull, he really was making a case, as you mentioned, that the Taung skull, even though it had a smaller brain case, was to be considered. And that, in fact, he was supporting Darwin's theory that humans had evolved in Africa. And that, too, was rejected. So it wasn't for another 25 years until the late 1940s that scientists began to take the Taung skull seriously. And that was really because of increasing evidence and fossil finds in Africa.
Thanks, Krista. I wonder if you can maybe expand a little bit on, what sort of the government's position was in South Africa. Just thinking about, I know we will come to this a little bit later, but the kind of political context that all of this fits into too.
Right. And in fact, Darwin's hunch really is looking at the social and political context that changed over time. I mean, in South Africa, there was a somewhat warmer reception for the Taung skull. In fact, Jan Smuts, who was the former former prime minister of South Africa, he was very interested in paleoanthropology, and he was very excited about Dart's find. And he sent Dart a very warm letter of congratulations. And his thinking was that South Africa should be more involved and more central to the field of paleoanthropology. But his thinking was that it would help unify white South Africans who were quite divided at the time in the 1920s around science. So he had a very particular political motivation. And he also was, coming from quite a racist perspective, in the sense that he believed that it may have been likely that humans evolved in Africa, but then became, as he described it, less primitive as they became more European. So there was a different setting in South Africa than there was in Europe, and Jan Smuts wanted to be sort of an alternative to the colonial scientists, but he too had a very colonial view within South Africa.
Thanks, Krista. Yeah, I mean, that gives us a really nice sort of overview of the differences. But and I want to sort of turn to Mirriam and think about how this, we've now covered the colonial attitude sort of the time. And I'm thinking about how that colonial attitude had an effect on just the field of paleoanthropology in general. So Mirriam, can you maybe talk a little bit to, has the field moved forward? I mean, we hope it has, but in a sense of, what still needs to change?
Thank you, Lauren. The field of paleoanthropology in South Africa, it is one that is dominated by white males. It has been for years, and that probably originated from the colonial rules, where the good education and certain fields were really prioritized for the minority privileged. We had several laws that spoke to the education sector in South Africa, and also one that really did also cascade into the youth at one point, really just raising their voices against that, the Bantustan Act of Education. So we grew up in the picture that we read as young academics joining the field was Blacks would be participating in paleoanthropology as laboratory preparators. They will be participating in the field as excavators, as laborers in the field. But when it comes to the scholarly work, that was reserved for the select few. Transformation is taking place. Also, the government has done a lot to really address transformation. We also have the strategy that speaks to solely palaeosciences, where it prioritizes inclusiveness of communities where these heritage sites are, where these fossils are excavated. It also really just stresses on the human capacity training. We need to train personnel in South Africa that really do understand and are equipped to really undertake the research within these fields. One of the recent conferences I attended, one of the speakers cited the permit holders in South Africa, that majority of the permit sites in South Africa, when you look at the statistics, majority are still held by the Europeans. So we still have a long way to go. There is progress that we can note now, but we still have a lot of work on our hands. And also, to make it inclusive to schools. Evolution is a subject that really was not accepted by a majority of the Christian population, because that's the population that we have in South African schools. It was recently added as part of the educational curriculum. So we need to also just do the work for evolution to be accepted, to capacitate those that are really the people that reaches the masses regarding the sciences. We reach a select few. We are scholars, we are academics, we write papers. We have just now celebrating that we have now dropped one of the best, I'm going to say the best, because it features a language that has not been featured in the sciences, and it also included the communities on the ground. So to me, that speaks to the change that we want to see, the transformation we want to see. So we reach a select few of the public. Our teachers reach the majority, so we also need to capacitate them, to educate them, so that they are confident in educating, because we know evolution is a complex subject. But we have done several activities to speak to that. But what I can say is there's still a lot of work to be done. Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you, Mirriam. Thank you for that context. So you brought up a point about heritage and sort of an education, and I was thinking about this in terms of how South Africa has used fossil discoveries in nation building. So this has been the case in both apartheid state, so what Krista was speaking about, but then also post-apartheid state times. And I'm thinking about how the Littlefoot announcement, for example, in 1998 was really publicized and used as a tool for the UNESCO World Heritage Site designation of the cradle. So I think, Robyn, I'm gonna ask you first, and then maybe Krista, you can chime in afterwards. In what ways has the Taung Child contributed to South Africa's identity as the sort of cradle of humankind, and especially our shared origins? And also, are there any pros and cons to this narrative? Especially since there was such a fraught motive behind evolutionary studies in historical South Africa. So, Robyn, I don't know if you want to comment on this, and then Krista can join in.
Yeah, I will say that I think it was an important part of sort of establishing South Africa as a nation. It was a young nation, and Jan Smuts invested state resources into archaeologists and paleoanthropologists. He flew them to the first Pan-African Archaeological Association meeting just before apartheid started. And I think what comes to mind is just the power of fossils, right? The power of fossils to sort of create this foundation, or to legitimize a place as a place that generates knowledge, right? That is part of the civilized world. Like, South Africa is part of this world, right? It's not just on the southern end of Africa. And I think there are lessons that we can learn from that, but I'll hand over to Krista to discuss it a bit more. And I think for me, like, Taung is such a difficult fossil because there's this beautiful history of establishing Africa as the place where we evolved from, right? And contradicting a racist narrative. But then there's also all this race science associated with it, right? And so it's like how, and I don't think we've actually dealt with that history and how these things have played out. And so I hand over to Krista. Yeah.
Lauren, I know you're going to come back for us to talk a little bit in more depth about the history of race science, which Robyn referred to. But in terms of thinking about nation building, it's so interesting to look at how, Jan Smuts was so interested in that in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. And then the apartheid government did not believe in human evolution, largely for religious reasons. And so they did not support paleoanthropology. They did not support research. So, that had an impact. And also the international viewpoint during apartheid was very important. And so attention really shifted away from South Africa. Attention and exchanges shifted away from South Africa and shifted towards East Africa. And that was also as a result of a growing number of fossil finds in East Africa in the 50s and 60s. That played a role. And then, Robyn, as you were saying, post-apartheid, Thabo Mbeki was very interested, again, in paleoanthropology as the president of the country, but he had a very different motivation from Jan Smuts. His motivation was really to try to unify South Africa, black and white, and to encourage people to be proud of South Africa and to be proud of Africa's contributions. However, it gets complicated when there are efforts, to kind of infuse fossils, ancient fossils, with some kind of national identity or to be a national hero. I think that the geographic location of fossils are important, but they have global relevance. There's one interesting story. Philip Tobias, who was Raymond Dart's successor at Wits University, carried the Taung Child to New York City in 1984. And they were getting ready to celebrate the 60th year of the Taung skull. But he wasn't thinking about international issues and how South Africa was a pariah at that point. And there were protesters outside of the American Museum of National History, and some of the posters said, "Apartheid fossils not wanted." So, fossils can take on some of not what was happening 2.5 million years ago when there were no national borders, but what is occurring in our lives today. Thanks.
Thank you, Krista. Robyn, do you want to expand on that? Maybe thinking about, should governments be actively promoting fossils as part of national heritage?
Yeah, and so I think when it comes to thinking about decolonizing science, right, and the idea of decolonizing science, I feel a lot of also just ambiguity of the language of transformation and decolonization of the roads must fall, because I think there's a certain commitment that is needed when we say we're going to decolonize science, right? It's not just a word, it's an action. And I think one of the lessons that we've learned from South Africa is that these fossils were excavated under conditions of settler colonialism, right? When I was just reading more about Jan Smuts, and I came across a speech that he had on the native problem, and he said, these happy and docile people, and it was so paternalistic, the language he used. And I think about Israel and Palestine at the moment, right? And that there are many fossils that come from that region. Those fossils are largely owned and researched by Israeli academic institutions. Just today, I did research on the Neanderthal Ramla fossil. That fossil was discovered also in a limestone quarry. And it was a commercial excavation. The limestone quarry is used to make cement, and that cement is used to build the wall on the West Bank, right, which has been declared as an illegal form of annexing parts of the West Bank, Palestinian land, and displacing people. So biological, like this science is so deeply implicated because we go into the earth, right? And we look for fossils. And the earth is about connection. It's about people being displaced, right? And that's the story of South Africa as well. And I think there hasn't been any opinion that I've seen from the field about this issue. Israeli academic institutions continue to publish in journals in this field, even though the Palestinian people have called for boycott and divestment from these institutions that support genocide. And so I think, like, what are the lessons that we can learn, and what are the papers we're going to write when we look retrospectively at the history of the discipline? Are we again going to write that the discipline did nothing, right? As it did nothing during apartheid, as it did nothing during the time of DART. And so that's my view on that issue, and I just wanted to share that.
Thank you, Robyn. I mean, the connections are pretty clear. So I just want to finish off the section of history or reflecting on history and thinking about how we should handle the legacies of especially scientists like Raymond Dart, who, of course, made groundbreaking contributions, but were colonialists and, in Dart's case, very racist. Is it just to recognize and learn and move on? Like, what should we do? Is there Krista, maybe if you want to comment on this.
Thanks, Lauren. I think it's important to go back to the 1920s because as scientists across the world, actually late 1800s, early 1900s, scientists in Europe, UK, US were not only looking for human fossils, but they were also collecting human skeletons. And Dart, drew from that tradition and brought it to South Africa. And at the time, also, there was an incorrect belief that humans could be divided, living humans could be divided into pure and distinct, separate racial types, and that those racial types were based on physical characteristics. And so we know now that that is not the case. But scientists, including Dart, thought that studying living people could give them, and these types could give them a clue to understanding human evolution. So Dart developed a human skeleton collection. He and his students were involved in a number of disturbing and racist practices involving quite invasive physical measuring of people's physical characteristics, including their sexual organs. Scientists were involved in grave robbing and the trade of human remains. And so I think that that history is something that we have to pay attention to in terms of looking at the history of paleoanthropology. And Dart also believed in something called cultural diffusion. He did not believe that local people, that Africans, were involved with some of the amazing cultural developments, including Great Zimbabwe, including Mapungubwe. He felt that they were developed by external forces. So I think it's important today to, yes, recognize Dart's groundbreaking contribution to the understanding of the Taung skull and our understanding of human evolution, but at the same time recognize his involvement with scientific racism, and that is also a part of his legacy. Thank you.
Thank you, Krista. I thank you so much for that. It was an amazing discussion. I feel that this discussion can go on for hours and hours and hours, but yeah, thank you. I'm gonna have to move on just for the sake of time. But just to let everyone know out there that's watching, get Krista's book because the book really does go into detail about all these things that we've been talking about. So thanks all that Mirriam, Robyn, Krista for your contributions here. So the next thing I want to do is move on to talking a little bit about the science. So I wanted to start with a question to Georgina, and I also see we've lost Bernard maybe, but I'm going to start with Georgina, and then we'll see how it goes. And this is a question that is really thinking about the geology of these sites. So the discovery of the Taung Child, during lime mining activities before and also up to the 1920s, it reminds us that so many South African fossils were unearthed as a result of these extractive mining processes. But this mining activity has also, disturbed a lot of the stratigraphic context and provenience of the finds, right? So it uncovered a lot of finds, but it's also disturbed a lot of, the layers. So can you, Georgina, can you comment on how this sort of affects work being done today in the cradle, since you do work in the cradle, maybe with, an example from your own research?
Thank you, Lauren. So in order to answer your question, I'll provide some geological background. So the caves in the cradle have two types of rocks. So we have one, the lime, and that's what the miners sought after, and we refer to it as palaeothems. And the second type is the sediments in which the fossils are found. So you find that the miners went after these palaeothems and they mined them out by blasting using explosives. And as you can imagine, this is very destructive. And it has made it quite challenging for us to imagine how the caves looked before they had been subjected to mining. So during the blasting, the fossils and the sediments around them were extracted and they were placed in piles around the caves. So we refer to these piles as mine dumps. So we mostly find animal fossils from these mine dumps, and an example is one of my PhD research sites called Gondolin. So at Gondolin, there are 4 mine dumps, and out of one of these dumps, 2 hominin teeth were recovered. So through the discovery of these teeth in the dumps, it made it quite challenging to actually trace them back to the original context within the caves. And this makes it hard to date them. So part of my PhD project is to look at what's left after mining and try and reconstruct how the caves looked like 2 to 3 million years ago when the hominin existed, and to also try and trace back the blasted blocks back to the caves. So much as it sounds terrible and like a bad legacy, it's through mining that these fossils were exposed, as you mentioned. It's through mining that sections of the cave have been exposed. And in most of the caves, we have enough of the original stratigraphy and parts of the cave that will help us to understand how the fossils accumulated in the cave and how old they are. And that is the bottom line of linking the geology to the mining of speleothems within the cradle. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Georgina. Yeah, that provides a nice kind of overview of what you have to deal with, I think. I just quickly double checking if we have completely lost Bernard or if he's in the wing.
Can you hear me? I can't see myself anymore, but can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I don't know what happened there. It didn't like my face.
No, and I'm about to ask you a question, and I hope that you could show the audience where you actually are. But basically, Bernard is currently in the vault, uh, and basically next to the Taung Child. So hopefully, when your camera goes on again, you can show the audience the actual fossil. But Bernard, as the curator of the Taung Child, but also many other fossils housed in the Evolutionary Studies Institute at WITS. You have had a front row seat, I think, to so much cutting edge research on South African fossils through the years. And of course, the Taung Child was the first fossil evidence of early hominin evolution in Africa. So, at the time, there was basically no evidence for the what we now know as the bushiness and complexity of our lineage. But I would like to get a comment from you about thinking about the major scientific discoveries and breakthroughs after Taung, and that you've maybe seen yourself. So some personal anecdotes about that, and just kind of thinking about how they've changed the way we view human evolution. I know that's a big question, but what I really want is, I think the audience also wants some personal stories.
Okay, Lauren, thank you. If you saw me, I've got this big smile on my face because I take it for granted that I have the privilege of being able to see this very special fossil at any time I really want to. And of course, interacting with all the scientists that directly or indirectly study this fossil. So unfortunately, the camera is not on, or I can't get myself on, because I have here a reconstruction of the piece of breccia. It's a reconstruction by Professor Ron Clark of, I presume, from photographic evidence where Raymond Dart was preparing out this fossil. And I think for ordinary mortals, it's quite difficult to actually identify anything there. And regardless of the legacy of these past scientists, they were amazing at identifying these things and immediately seeing that this was something special. And of course, it consists of a small jaw, of what we call a child, a face, and amazingly also a brain endocast. And one of the first things that were noticed was that it had a area for the foramen magnum, which is the hole in the bottom of your skull that sits on top of your spine, is quite central, suggesting that this creature walked upright. And that is the real key to us knowing that this is not a monkey, it's not an extinct ape. It's something that, with a mixture of ape-like and human-like features, is in fact lies somewhere between the apes and us. And having been found in Africa, Dart at the time estimated it to be 1 million years old. Now we know that it's much older than that. We're looking at about, sort of the 2.5 million time span, that it suggested for the first time that our very ancient origins are here in Africa. So that's kind of where it comes from, and it's quite profound. Philip Tobias said at the time that it suggests we come from Africa is no small thing, and in fact, it is, by our modern liberal standards, quite a profound statement. And of course, that evidence has increased over time. And what always amazes me is that at the time, you had only the morphological studies you could do. It was the shape of things, what they looked like, and virtually nothing else to compare it to. It was only when other fossils were found, and eventually Legros Clark started refuting the suggestion that it couldn't be a human ancestor or a human relative. And those naysayers, Sir Arthur Keith, Grafton Elliott Smith, Arthur Woodward, the so-called Piltdown gang, the people that thought the Piltdown man was in fact a bona fide hominin, they all had to admit that they were wrong. And ultimately, someone like Darwin, who suggested that Africa might be the cradle of humankind, actually was correct I think Darwin had studied only one fossil in his time. He was by no means a paleoanthropologist. So sort of coming into the modern age, we find that there are people that have done some studies on the Taung Child directly. And I'm thinking of, some of the work done on the brain endocast by someone like Dean Falk. I don't want to name too many names because there are so many people who worked on it, either directly or indirectly, looking at metopic sutures and being able to consider blood flow to the brain and coming up with conclusions like, we talk of the Taung child. It isn't, in fact, a child. It's a baby. So I've heard some scientists refer to the Taung baby, which made me think, oh, is it really a baby? It is, because it developed in a different way, more an ape-like development rather than a human-like development. And that was also odd, that you've now got a biped with a kind of an ape-like ontogeny. Over time, of course, with being studied by so many people, this poor thing had been handled a lot. Scientists were still using steel digital calipers, and as a result, the teeth have been worn down. There were 2 teeth that broke some years ago and had to be repaired. And we are now much more careful in the way we allow people to handle it. Of course, with the age of CT scanning, the various imaging techniques, that was not available to Dart and even Philip Tobias in his early days. It was Conroy and Veneer, I think, in the 1980s, 1987, somewhere around there, who were the first people to do imaging. And that, of course, changed the science quite rapidly. Now, every scientist that walks into our lab wants to see the Taung child, not necessarily for scientific purposes, but as a pilgrimage experience. And what's also interesting, and almost without exception, when people look at it, they say, what a beautiful fossil. It would be interesting to see what Krista and Mirriam, for example, have to say on that, because saying some dead creature is beautiful is a bit odd, but it has to do with the way it fossilized, the way the calcium carbonate crystals glitter on the brain endocast. And this has also led people outside of our field to take an interest in the Taung child and find another way of communicating the message of what this represents to the public. And those are artists who originally, considering myself a hard scientist, thought, oh, you've got all these arty people coming in and wanting to draw pictures of our fossil. And I was amazed at how informed they were and how through their artworks they managed to bring that message across. And just looking at the paper that Mirriam was a lead author on in the special issue of the SAJS makes me think that perhaps we need to go a little more that route and use people outside of our science to convey that message. So that is kind of where we stand. It's also something that here at WITS accidentally leads to a lot of interest from people outside our field that are, in industry and in business, politicians, people from various countries, ambassadors who would like to look at the child, and we presume they know exactly what it is. And that's not necessarily the case. We also find that there are people that have been offered to come visit these valuable fossils that decline because they feel it interferes with their personal belief systems. So I think it's true for many other fossils as well, but this is indeed a very, very special individual in that it was where it really, literally all started. It is the very first hominin fossil that WITS took care of. And it also just has this extraordinary look to it. Where do you find the face, the lower jaw, and a brain endocast of the same individual? It's just very, very coincidental. Whether this has been fully explored, we uncertain. In recent times, there have been debates about the age of this particular specimen. There are two real issues. We don't know exactly how old it is. Most recently, Francis Thackeray hypothesized 2.58 million years, which of course falls well within that 2 to 3.6 million year time range that Australopiths existed. And then the other debatable area, of course, is we don't know where it came from. We don't know exactly where it came from, and that makes the context more difficult. And then also in more recent years, Lee Berger and Ron Clark hypothesized that the child or the infant or the baby didn't really live at Taung, but in fact was killed elsewhere by an eagle and dropped on the spot. And I think that is quite a well-established hypothesis, to a point that it's now a theory that we have quite a lot of evidence for that. So we do sometimes get the kind of message of scientists have now finished with this particular specimen and we can move on. But I do think in future there will be more to be done. One of my concerns is that there's a tendency to destructively sample fossils, which we can learn a lot from. Proteomics is the latest science. We can essentially get molecular information regarding the sex of an individual, and in future we'll be able to find out much more. And of course, the Taung Child being a holotype, the representation of Australopithecus africanus, that will not be permitted. So we have some limitations in how far the science can go.
Thanks, Bernard. Thank you so much. Okay, so I just want to can you look down on your screen, and if you see a video icon and it's red, click it, because it might turn on your video. I think, because I feel like the whole audience, like all the audience, is really wanting to see what you have in your hand.
Yeah, I'm afraid I've got it on, but I don't see myself come
Oh
up.
no. Okay.
It's an oddity.
Yeah, try again.
Sorry, everyone.
No, it's okay. But okay, so thank you so much, Bernard and Georgina. I'm going to move on to talking about the community of Taung, and I think, and also just other communities in general, communities around paleoanthropological finds. And Robyn, I just want to first talk to you, and then I'll talk to Mirriam. So, Robyn, do you think enough is being done to kind of ensure that local communities benefit from fossil discoveries? And what ethical obligations do scientists have towards these communities? And basically, what can be done?
Yeah, so I think, like as Krista pointed out, a big part of of Raymond Dott's legacy is the collection of people. And I think that's a big point of contention and the history of race science, because that still marks our lived experience, right? As much as we've said it's not real, we can see these things playing out now, right? These ideas continue to, and the representations that were produced by biological anthropologists continue to shape the experience of people who have those traits, right? And I think that a big part of the work is sort of recognizing that this is not, that having a collection of human remains, racializing people, sort of saying that we need large collections to do our research. Those conversations continue to justify the racial inequality. It's part of that system of justification. And I think if we want to connect with communities around these issues, I think it's not so much the fossil, but it's the research that is tied to the fossil and the narratives that are produced in doing that research, even if it is just to say that we need access to people and we need access to many people, who are the people that are in collections. The other thing I want to say is that my own experience has been that often we have a very paternalistic relationships with communities, and we come in with our own bias, and that informs the relationship in so many ways, so that it, like, the community, I think, sometimes becomes illegible. Like we cannot hear what the community has to say or has to offer, because we already have this idea about the community. And I think when it comes to human evolutionary science, I often heard that the site that I work at, the community refused to have research done on the human remains. And scientists kept on saying, well, they don't know, if only they understood what we had to offer. And it wasn't about what scientists had to offer, right? These were also intellectuals. And they'd been engaging in debates about Sarah Baartman and the collection of human remains. These were also intellectuals who come from an intellectual lineage where you have people publishing and engaging with human evolutionary science in the 1940s and 1980s as a counterpoint to apartheid policy, right? To counter that logic, to say that race isn't real, scientifically it's been shown. And so we have this depth of engagement. And I think often we don't do enough work to know the communities that we engage with. And we have essentialized ideas of how they represent themselves. And even when the community offers us something else, we cannot receive it because we assume that we know what they need. And so I think when it comes to paleoanthropology, and this is the thing, it's always, yeah, oh, let's go and meet the community, hear what they need. It's like they're this mystical being, mystical group of people that you're going to go and you're going to show them the fossil. You're going to say, what do you think about the fossil? And what do you think about? But then, firstly, this is probably not the first time they've seen the fossil. They know like that this fossil has power and is a commodity in some way, right? They have basic needs that they have where they live, right? They have tensions and power inequalities, and you need to know that, right? You can't go to them and be like, oh, I spoke to this community and this is what they told me. And you don't actually know what's happening on the ground. You don't know what has happened there before in terms of research. You don't know how communities have contested those research, how they've maybe done their own research. When Mirriam was talking about the story, the oral history of Taung, people have that story, Mirriam approving that, hearing that story, and yet we someone will think of a project and then go to Taung and say, let's get everyone into a room and say, like, this is the fossil, what do you guys think about it? And I think it's like we have work to do actually as researchers, and our work is beyond knowing the fossil, and it's beyond saying I'm a researcher and I'm going to tell you something about this fossil. It's about knowing context. And so yeah, that's what I think we need to do with communities and engaging with communities.
Thank you so much, Robyn, for that insight. I also, I agree 100%. And I think Mirriam can also kind of speak to some maybe of some of the work that has been done, especially within the community of Taung, because obviously, as Mirriam said, she grew up in a village 30 kilometers from the actual site that, from the Buxton Lime Works. And Mirriam has also been, in various, been engaging with her community in paleoanthropological kind of work. And Mirriam also works in the heritage sphere. So she knows about, how education about our heritage can be used to sort of create a bridge. But as Robyn, you just pointed out, hi, this is the Taung Child is not education about our heritage. So I was thinking maybe, Mirriam, could you provide us some, information about an example of a successful collaboration that you've seen? And also you're welcome to describe any ongoing work that you are currently involved with.
Thank you, Lauren. With regards to paleoanthropology, the collaboration between scientists and the general public, to be honest, it is not a common feature. The activities are far and few in between. But having said that, we have had several activities. When I was still at Wits, we actually discussed this when we were about to be live with Bernard. We had several activities with several stakeholders. And also the project was led by a non-local, a not-for-profit organization in Taung, where we had workshops that we held with the communities at home. We had workshops at schools. The largest group we received more than 19 schools in a day, where we really would educate the scholars, the general population, and mostly the teachers about the significance of the site in Taung. What does the skull stands for, and really just the contribution South Africa did really provide to the world regarding the evolution of mankind. So the activities were successful. Right now, I'm not part of those activities where we will go to schools and do that. It's something that really we need to resurrect, because when we were doing that, the lack of correct information that we came across in the communities was shocking regarding what is the skull, what does it stand for, what is a fossil. And we do understand that Taung is a remote area, far away from majority of the resources in the country to begin with. But as a community, as the palaeosciences, you spoke about responsibilities and our ethical commitments towards really saving the community of South Africa regarding the information that we have in the vaults. So we, as Robyn said, we still have a long way to go, and also to correct the narrative. Bernard will tell you that, some will tell you that the skull needs to come back because it is one of our own. They believe it is a few hundred years old. When you tell them about 2.5 million years, you are speaking about a concept that they do not understand. How are we to change that mindset if we are not educating them about what does it represent? The correctness of the scientific information they hold is something that it is within our responsibilities that we really need to say. You also made a little bit of you asked a question regarding the contribution of Dad and also his racism characteristics, whether do we ignore the good that he did towards the science and also focus on that. But I think with authority comes a great deal of responsibilities, and with responsibility you cannot really diffuse compassion and empathy. And you need to look at a situation where when you tell the science, right now, even where I am at the National Heritage Council, we are funding projects that are inclusive of communities. We do not want a community to be an observer in the sciences that has been scribed, that has been narrated for them. We usually say, by the people, for the people. If you are going to scribe or to narrate a history of a place about the communities, include them so that they give you the most correct information. That's where really public engagements, public outreach is something that we need to strengthen. They are part of what is expected of us to do as part of the strategy, but mostly there are sites that has been done in great detail. There are sites that are in remote areas, but they have visitor numbers. The populations around their surroundings, they know everything about those sites. But there is only the majority of the sites in South Africa, they are within those populations where science to them is a foreign subject. The gap between the science and the scientists and the communities where these fossils are excavated is something that is glaring, is something that even 100 years after the effect, we are still speaking about that, which indicate that we tend to be focusing on getting scientific papers out there. Scientific papers that majority of those people, especially even the management authorities, when you give them a scientific paper and you expect them to absorb that language, it is a challenge. So we need to implement activities and plans where we really break down the science and we go to the communities, and when we incorporate them in our activities in the sciences, we do that with respect. We don't want to 100 years down the line we narrate what Krista said, that there were measurements that were taken from certain individuals that were done in the most disrespectful manner. So we are now pushing for the sciences that is respectful and inclusive, and I think we will really change the narrative of and also achieve the mandate of bridging the gap between palaeosciences and the communities where we are really getting these materials from. Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you, Mirriam. Thank you for that insight. I feel that this is a really good point to bring us into our next theme, which is looking to the future. So, thinking about, of course, what Robyn and Mirriam said in terms of, community and, Mirriam, you said by community for community, by us for us. And I'm also thinking about we've spoken about the complicated history of our field, and how important that reflection is for going forward, but also that paleoanthropology on the African continent has historically been sort of dominated by foreign researchers, and of course we are seeing a change. And Georgina, I wanted to kind of talk to you about this, because there have been recent initiatives by institutions like HERI at the University of Cape Town to form a sort of pan-African network for paleoanthropological research. And I want you, to, as a young, an early career researcher, thinking about why this is so important to do for future generations, and also talk a little bit about what else maybe you think could grow our capacity.
Thank you, Lauren. So, as we've all discussed, science is about collaboration. And as Mirriam has said, it's all about being inclusive. So, when we work together, we can increase the current knowledge that we have and also set up the foundation for greater advances and greater discoveries for science in the future. So, as we all know that fossil sites in Eastern Africa, like Kenya and Tanzania and Ethiopia, have been linked to early hominins, but so also has South Africa. And each of these regions is conducting high quality research, and we're using different techniques based on the geology that we're working on. So, in order for us to actually have the big picture on human evolution, we cannot work alone. We need to look at all this information together so that we can be able to study it and identify the similarities and the differences that we have between the records of Eastern Africa and South Africa. And by working together, we are able to share our knowledge, we're able to impart skills on each other. And that is important if we want to make science better. And I feel that as a member of HERI, I am one of the beneficiaries of this Pan-African collaboration because I am able to combine the knowledge and the skills that I gained in Kenya with the ones I'm currently gaining here in South Africa. And for future generations of researchers, even my own students, I think it's important to develop these collaborative networks because through them, we are able to share our knowledge, we are able to impart skills on each other. We set up networks for access to experts, and we also develop our own networks. And through this, we're able to improve the quality of the science that we are working on. And also, we're also creating room and fostering our African heritage because we're encouraging African scientists to work on the African fossil and geological record within the continent. And I feel this is a great step towards growing collaborative networks within the country and the continent as a whole. Thank you.
Amazing, Georgina. Thank you for that insight. I'm looking at the time, and we only have 15 minutes left, which is I cannot believe how fast the time went. But I'm also looking at the Q&A section, and I don't see any questions from the audience. So perhaps what I will do now is ask Bernard to show the audience, because they have been waiting, all the things you wanted to show them.
Okay, I'll try and keep it brief because I have a habit of going on. Just to give an idea, I mentioned before, and I don't know if you can see that, this is the reconstruction of the piece of breccia. So that's a sort of cemented rock in which the Taung skull was found. And what Dart noticed was that and that, or in fact, it would have been Josephine Salmons. And I notice a family member of Josephine is on this forum, who was in fact the person who noticed this. And that comes back to the discussions we've had before, where people are not included in the actual work. But noticed this, and Dart looked at it, and I personally may not have picked up all those features, but there's like a mushroom-like feature here, which is representative of the cross-section of the brain. And if we have this articulate, this is of course a cast, this is not the real one, but you can see from the bottom, you would see that. Sorry if that comes across a bit awkward. And that, okay. So that's what was noticed. And then of course there was also a brain endocast. This is also a cast in that. And with Lauren's permission, I'm going to just slip across to where the skull is kept, and we'll have a quick look. Give me 1 second. So this used to be kept, I don't know, can you see that? There you go. Unfortunately, we can't keep it articulated, which is the way you would see it in photographs, and it's that sort of iconic picture. This is probably the most photographed hominin fossil ever. And we've tried to keep it in a way that the three pieces can be safely stored. It used to be in a box, which also has a story of its own. That was a box that apparently after Dart had been to London, to the Royal Society, London, the Royal Society. And he asked his wife to take the skull back to the hotel room. That's what people did in those days. And she left it on the taxi seat, and it rode around in a cab in London all night long, and then was delivered at a police station. And subsequently, the next morning, the Taung Child was announced in the newspaper, and they noticed it and informed Dart that they'd found the skull. So I don't want to be a fly on the wall of what went down that evening when, in fact, this valuable specimen was almost lost. And I think a lot of people still think the little box we have was the original box it was held in, but I had a lengthy discussion with Philip Tobias on that, and he said no, he doesn't think so. He thinks it's about the third box that was made for it. It was in fact just stored in there, which was very dramatic to show to people. But as scientists, we believe it needs to be curated properly, so this is not something we handle unnecessarily.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Bernard. I'm sure everyone is very happy that they could see what you were trying to show earlier. We do have a couple of questions in the Q&A, and I have one here. So some of you, two of you, I don't know, Mirriam, maybe you want to respond to this. So this is by Law Pinto. And so they say, some may argue the skull should return to Taung, even temporarily. Many communities are suspicious of scientists because of the past racist science and the perceived gatekeepers of knowledge. Do you want to comment on that, Mirriam, about the Taung Child returning to Taung?
Thank you, Lauren. Actually, Ben will be the best person to answer this, but I'll take the first bite. The several discussions that ensued, he was part of the discussions. In some rooms, I was not even present in those rooms, but the take from the community is when it comes back, it will stimulate economic growth. It will stimulate heritage tourism. Mostly that's what the aim is. And also, I think even the provincial government has gone to length to really done infrastructure development at the site. We were fortunate this year, we visited the site in April. I was with colleagues from UJ, Dr. Khotleng, and we saw this infrastructure that is being put together. They have put more resources on what will be their interpretive center, and also they have made provisions for the vault. I'm sure they are probably anticipating resurrecting discussions with the university going forward. But above all, I think the safety of the skull will come first. If the curating institution and the management authority comes to any form of agreement, the safety of the skull needs to be prioritized. So that, I mean, Bernard just shared a lot of history regarding why we should preserve it. Not only it, but majority of the fossils in South Africa, we cannot rely on 3D models that when something is lost, we have a copy. We need the originals for survival. So if that is a discussion that the provincial department, the local authorities, and also the traditional leadership, because they play a great role in Taung, because Taung mostly resides within those resides within the leadership of traditional councils. When the time comes for them to have that discussion, priorities should be given to accessibility of the skulls to the communities, to the safety of the skull, and also how will the scientific communities carry on accessing the skull, because Bernard did say that we have not yet done all the sciences we would like to do. People believe that we have taken all measurements on the skull, we have taken all pictures we can take, but sciences continue. So if all of those stakeholders come to sit at the table and have a constructive discussion, I believe a possibility can be, an arrangement of some sort could be reached. Thank you, Lauren.
Thanks, Mirriam. I think, I think what you're saying is it's complicated. There's a lot of stakeholders, but yeah, I'm interested. I'm sure everyone else was interested to hear about the development of a center in Taung. And I know this museum is, it's exciting, I think. So Bernard, I know that you probably have something to comment, but there is another question in the chat. So perhaps I can get to that one because we only have 8 minutes left. So the next question in the chat is for all of us, but maybe we won't have time for everyone to go through this. But could you tease a bit what we have to look forward to from everyone here? And this is from Michael Rivera. Georgina, I want to call you out. What is next for you?
Wow. Yeah, for me, it's basically trying to understand more about the human evolution here in South Africa, and also trying to see how the records here are similar or are different to the ones in Eastern Africa. But also, apart from just doing the research and the science, it's also collaborating with other experts, diversifying what we know about the science, not just for me, but to also make science better and to also work on the heritage of South Africa and of Africa, where we are working on our materials and we are developing researchers and scientists. So we can also produce high quality research and data that is at par with other regions of the world. So that's my main dream for now.
Thanks, Georgina. Maybe Robyn, because I think she has something exciting.
Yeah, I want to finish my PhD. So I want to submit that. After that, I think what came out of my PhD is also that like a lot of the heritage significance of sites was determined during this colonial period. And so a lot of the language is about science, scientific significance, conservation, protection. And so we haven't really created heritage legislation that speak to other priorities, right? And so what does it mean for people to think of a fossil as an ancestor? And I know like that is how do we navigate that question without losing track of the science? Because I think part of colonialism is to make the abnormal normal. It's to say that the vault in Advert is the only place the fossil can be. And this is not me saying that shouldn't be the case, Bern or Mirriam. I actually default to you on these questions, but I think can we interrogate those things a little bit? And that's what I'm curious. And also just looking at a history of African scholars actually engaging with this work. Maybe not in science, but having to do it on the periphery of science, but actually speaking to these issues. Yeah, that's what I hope to do. Yeah.
Thanks, Robyn. Krista, do you have a new book coming out?
Oh, thank you. Well, I have a recent book that came out, which is Our Science Ourselves: How Gender, Race, and Social Movements Shaped the Study of Science. And so that's another history of science book, but with a different focus, looking at a trailblazing group of women scientists in the Boston area in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, and how they came up with feminist and anti-racist critiques of their science. So looking a little more closely at scientific sexism as well. So I look forward to, I see, Darwin's Hunch and Our Science Ourselves as kind of sibling books. And I'm looking forward to engaging with a whole range of women scientists in South Africa. And you can see that women scientists, Black women scientists, are having an influence. And I would like to highlight that and give opportunities for us all to learn more about what's happening and the exciting things that are going on in science.
Thanks, Krista. All of this is so exciting. We have 3 minutes, and so what I want to do is just maybe turn to Bernard and Mirriam to give a sort of final closing remark, thinking about the commemoration and what does the centenary of the Taung Child mean to you? So let's start with Bernard, and then we can finish up with Mirriam.
Yes, thanks, Lauren. I think in an increasingly crazy world we are living in, I would like to see our science be used to fight ignorance, to fight stupidity. And we all need to act as evangelists, as it were, in our science, and use what we have here, use these amazing discoveries, that even though there are negative things around these discoveries, to use the positives and move forward and make the world a better place.
Thank you, Bernard. And Mirriam, the final word.
Thank you, Lauren. I think as celebrating the centenary, we really are acknowledging the role of Africa it played in the story of the origin of mankind. And I look forward to a multi-layered collaboration amongst all stakeholders so that we explore all avenues and build a very inclusive palaeoscience, i.e. palaeoanthropology field in South Africa. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. We are at the end of our panel discussion. Number one, I cannot believe we actually, made it in time. I thought this was gonna be 3 hours long, but I'm really happy, and thank you so much to our panelists. Of course, thank you to the audience for joining, for those wonderful questions too. And don't forget to download our open access special issue of the South African Journal of Science. As I said, it is live and it's free. So yeah, but thank you so much, and have a lovely rest of your day. The Taung Day, I guess. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Robyn. Thanks, Eddie. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much.